Does this gardener only do factories and industrial sites? Do they only sort of do very large country mansions, or are they willing to come and mow your back lawn that's only 5 square metres or something like that to do it? So what sort of scale are they? So on finding that service, you can then be put in touch with that service provider and invoke it. Just like looking up a telephone number. You look up a telephone number, you say, find me Bill's telephone number in your little list, and you click on and dial, and you then put through to that person. The original registry can then be forgot. You don't really need that registry then, because you know who you're contacting and what they're capable of doing. So we've got these processes that are going through of discovering the process, and there's a protocol for that, this uniform, and I can't remember what the UDDI stands for now, but it's basically a discovery service. With probably the interaction there, there's discovery, and well, there's not that many things you can sort of make out of UDDI. Some way of describing that service, and we'll have a quick look at WSDL today, or Web Service Description Language. There's a JSON, that's an XML-based way of doing it. There's a JSON-based way of describing the web services, and there's something called a waddle as well for it. How you exchange the messages, that to be JSON or XML, or this SOAP idea, and how they're actually transported over the network, whether it's HTTP or one of these sort of file transfer methods for it. One of the very first ones, and we're talking ages ago, like before year 2000. I mean, that's a long sort of prehistory sort of times. There was an original idea of an XML remote procedure call with this RPC. Because the problem that you've got, somebody somewhere has got a service. And you're the client wanting to make use of it. So somewhere in here, there's, say, some methods to use, something to invoke. Now, you don't know whether that's in C++, Java, C, all these sort of, C#, all these sort of various languages. If you were doing it locally, if I just said something like, okay, film dot get films with wars in it, that's a sort of Java type invocation, and you're fairly familiar with what these different components are. That's a method name, that's some sort of parameter, in this case it's a string, that's the object name. Now that just happens to be how we do it in Java. It's pretty similar to how you do it in C# and C++. Is there any people on the programming languages course where you're looking at different languages every week? How's it done in say Smalltalk?
To not mention this terrible language.
That's terrible. Well, I'm just trying to think of another language.
In PHP you can do object, arrow, method, parameters.
Thank you. That might be one of them. So in another language, you might have something like film, like this sort of method, yeah.
And then parameters.
And where do the parameters go? In brackets?
Yeah, in the brackets, yes.
Yeah, so in brackets. Anybody know any other ways in other languages?
Most of them just use a dot.
Yeah, dot notation is very, very sort of common to sort of doing it.
Double colon.
So what's that
double
one?
colon.
How does that one sort of use it?
We click on Java. We're doing the Java rates.
There's all sorts of weird ways, basically, of doing it. I mean, once you get outside the standard languages, there's all sorts of weird ways of doing roughly the same sort of thing. You want some sort of object named, you want a method named, and you want the parameters. And this idea of what do we mean by a string, that varies according to which language you're in. Some have got fixed length strings, some have got null terminated strings, some have got 0 terminated strings. How big's an int? If you say that something's being passed an int, that can vary according to your language. Some have 2-byte ints, some have 4-byte ints, 8-byte ints. So this idea of interoperability can sort of matter when you're wanting to invoke. If this is sending you back, say, some binary data inside an object, you have to know the exact structure of that object according to whichever language produced it. Now, the idea of wrapping it up in one of these XMLs or whatever is to encode it, both the answer and how you actually invoke it. Because you don't know what the other sides want. All you know is, look, I want to pass over, there's a method, that you've got a method somewhere called getFilms. And there's a parameter that I'm going to pass called wars. Can you somehow do a procedure call or a method call over at your side? I don't know how you're going to do it, but that's the essential idea, that this is the sort of method to it. And that's what we do inside this remote RPC using XML, or using this SOAP idea. We wrap the request up in a sort of nice wrapper to be able to sort of do that. So in terms of, say, an XML one, we say, well, look, I'm about to give you a method call. The method name is weather get weather, and there's a parameter here with the value Aberdeen AB25. So you have no idea at the other side how they're picking that up. No idea what the whether that's C# or Java at the other side. But the other side, when it receives it, if they can read that XML, knows what the method name is, what the list of parameters are, and can then assemble a method call, and then send some response back, saying, well, here's a method response to it. Here's a response about the weather in Aberdeen, horrible and wet, but the same sort of weather that we get around here for it. And that's the data coming back to it to indicate, well, yeah, you've requested this, and there might be sort of named parameters coming back for it as well, wrapped up in a particular format there. Now, SOAP was just an extension to that. Still use XML, it's just a bit more complex than that RPC. And it developed to ensure there was a standard. The W3C organisation, the World Wide Web Consortium, came up with an agreed set of attribute names, an agreed schema for what the SOAP environment looked like. And it basically created this idea of a SOAP envelope with a header and a body inside it, and they started to specify all these things that begin with SOAP env. They came from that particular namespace. So the SOAP env is coming from the SOAP envelope namespace, and these sort of schema names for how you sort of describe the others. And you can sort of say, well, here's how I define a string. Because if both sides don't agree on what a string is, or can't agree on what an int is, then why don't we just sort of somewhere say, well, this is how we're both defining an int. This is how we're both defining a string. So there's something called an address. There's a field called address that's of type, this XSI type, a string. This descriptor thing called a string. So that both sides can agree on what we mean by a string. It doesn't, so on both sides you can have the same thing for an int. So what follows is what we define as a string, this Aberdeen AB25, to get it. And you can invoke that, and then, yep, get your response. Here comes the response through, and then tucked away somewhere inside this, hopefully, yeah, horrible and wet. The response type being a string, so again, you know what sort of data type's coming back. You can define your own types as well, as long as both sides agree on that type. I have a pointer to what that sort of description is. One of the benefits of XML is this ability to self-describe the data. We can see all the sort of inbuilt parts of this, when really all you're wanting to do is that, along the lines of get the films Star Wars, or it might even just, and it just sort of returns you well, a list of them with just the sort of raw data, and that might be a bit sort of different because it's giving you a complex object. But I could call up get age of Ford, go to the films for it, or get actor age, and it comes back and tell you, yeah, Harrison Ford is, I don't know, 98. So, I'm sure he'd be pleased to say he looks 98. But all this is just wrapping that up, when essentially the raw data that you're sending back is just say the number 98 or the phrase horrible and wet to it. So it's a very small amount of data wrapped up in this huge envelope to it. So and each side has got to be able to sort of do this. In order to exchange it, what your client has got to do is to create this XML envelope from its call that it wants to do. Send it over. This has got to decode the envelope, perform the action, and then encode the response. Wrap it up in XML again, so you get this long, sort of drawn out role of having to do this at each